Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 130th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'd like to discuss two topics: personal evolution and retroactive thoughts, or revisiting the concept of egregores. So, just a little thing before I start. I've actually been censored for the first time on YouTube because I was talking about World Economic Forum and the vaccines and all that stuff. So that was an interesting experience. I don't know really what to make of it. If I should start porting my content elsewhere, because it would be a shame if my episodes are being taken down one by one. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let's get into the contents. So, personal evolution first. So there's one thing that I've always advised as a kind of an exercise, which is really important. It is to take whatever topic is important to you, or something that defines your personality. When you say, I am something. And then imagine that something you're doing is no longer relevant, no longer exists. So you can say, for instance, I am a climate activist, for instance. Or I am, let's say, anti-abortion. And one exercise you should do is imagine if suddenly climate change, tick box, it's solved, not a problem anymore, climate's doing fine, there will never be any problem with regards to climate change ever again, everything is under control, everything is happy clappy. And the same for abortion, like you've managed to get rid of abortion. 100% of women actually that are pregnant want to keep their babies, and everything is perfect. Check. And it doesn't really matter which side of the political spectrum you're on, whether it's controversial or not. Just do the exercise of looking at something that defines you, and then imagine that something disappeared tomorrow. And then ask yourself the question, what would I do? What do you see yourself doing now that whatever you've been so much struggling against or striving for is now solved? And especially, who would I be? Now, why are these questions important? Well, in my work as a lobbyist, for instance, protecting consumers in finance and all that stuff, I've always wondered what would happen, for instance, if snap of the finger and all banks, all financial institutions suddenly are like angels. They treat their customers absolutely diligently, perfectly. There isn't a single consumer complaint. Everything they do is absolutely perfect. Then what would I be doing? And this is really important because it begs the question of, are you actually unwittingly, unconsciously co-creating the other side of whatever you're striving to achieve or oppose, because you've identified so deeply with it? You've conflated climate activist as part of your personality, or being anti-abortion as being part of your personality, that if these issues were to be solved, part of you, part of your being, would actually have to die, would experience a kind of death, because it would be irrelevant. And I think we've all experienced that basically as we grew up. Basically you have to let certain parts of you die as you grow older, because you no longer are that which you were just a few years ago. And for children, that's not too hard because I don't think they're clinging on to their personalities as for dear life as adults. But the more you age, the harder it is for you to let go and let die parts of yourself that you've come to identify yourself with. This is really important because ultimately it doesn't really matter whether you're a climate activist or anti-abortion, whatever. What matters is, are you playing the game of being a climate activist consciously, or unconsciously? And what I mean by this is, are you consciously choosing to play the game of walking onto the stage as a climate activist, having your little script here saying la 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 la, corporations are polluting the earth, whatever, blah blah blah, and that you're going to go up on stage against like CEO of like BP or something, and once you're on stage, then you can play your role as climate activist because you have somebody to interact with. Understand that if tomorrow climate change is no longer a problem, if it's all solved, then if you cling on to the personality of being a climate activist, you'll find yourself alone on stage. And that'll be a little bit awkward, right? It's a bit like, imagine if you are a slave owner somebody that is pro-slavery, for instance, in the beginning of the 20th century in the US. Well, you're going to find yourself completely alone on stage because nobody is willing to play that kind of quote-unquote game or play with you. That is, there are no longer slaves. Like, the slavery is just not an issue anymore. Now it's about civil rights and all kinds of other things, but slavery is like, it's over. And so anytime there's a big societal change, it requires many people to actually let go of certain facets of their personality. And if that doesn't happen, then you have to wait for generational change, for real meaningful change to happen, because the old generation is going to recreate whatever they identify so deeply with. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, for instance, if you have a shift between royalty to democracy, like in the 18th, 19th centuries, where you had like revolutions, counter-revolutions, or whatever, you have to wait for a number of people to actually have made the shift permanently in their consciousness of letting die this idea of royalty, or to have integrated on top of it democracy, and then you can have this kind of smooth change from royalty to democracy, or royalty, I mean monarchy. Like in the UK, for instance, where you still have a royal family, but they don't have the same power as they used to have in the 15th, 16th century. Now the UK has a parliament, government, and of course there are still some kind of power struggles and whatever going on, but it's not at all the same kind of level as it used to be. And so ultimately what slows down, and this is like personal evolution, but I'm going to go linked to the second topic on retroactive thoughts and egregores. It is that we have to be conscious of the fact that if we identify too much with a certain topic or problem or whatever, then we're locking it into existence, because we're resisting that something we're identifying with of dying and evolving. So what can you do? It's a matter of evolving your identity. And therefore, when you change a little bit the script that you go up with on stage, the people that you interact with also change, and maybe you start interacting with other people as your identity evolves. And so let's say that you are a climate activist and you're still hopeful for a better future because suddenly because I mean you're thinking that, okay, we can curb emissions, we can do whatever, this or that, and you go up on stage and there you meet with CEOs, whatever, you get pushback, you get resistance, you get disappointed or whatever. Now, either you can stick to your guns and remain in that identity of, like, let's say, optimist or utopian, let's say, naive about the fact that, if only governments had the will to whatever, then with a snap of a finger, we could achieve so many things. And you'll walk up on stage and you'll continuously repeat this experience in a loop, basically. And then maybe if you evolve your personality, then you may turn to cynical. And you may decide that governments are actually, this whole system is locked in, that basically, the banking system, the governments, the big companies, all of this is just like so interweaved and locked on various levels. Everything is so too big to fail that if you try to just remove one cog of this whole mad machine, then the whole system comes crumbling down. And so it's like this mad machine that just goes on forward and cannot be stopped by anyone, actually, regardless. And so you may go into survivalist. And because your identity now changed, when you walk up on stage now, you're no longer a climate activist, you're like a doomsday prepper. And obviously the people you're interacting with now are completely different from the ones that you used to interact with. You're in your own kind of reality that is completely different from the reality you used to experience. And then maybe out of despair, you may have a spiritual awakening and realize that there's something deeper than all of this going on, that, we are just one cell in a global collective organism, that we are reproducing the experiences that we experienced inside our mother's womb, that, once humanity reaches the stage where it's a global collective organism, this planet will basically become self-aware through humans and will have all the mechanisms necessary to adjust its own planetary temperature. Just like your bodies are equipped with all the mechanisms necessary for regulating its internal temperature, bodily temperature. And then the experience changes again. And so it's really about having this, being sort of attuned consciously to your experiences, learning from the interactions, soaking in the emotions, whatever there is to learn, and then agreeing to evolve your persona or your identity. And it doesn't have to be a death in this instance, because it's more of a morphing kind of thing, a transformation. If you let yourself be transformed by the experiences you live and integrate them, then it can be really painless. But if you cling on to your identity, then the change might be actually radical and maybe experienced like a death. And so it's almost like people that would cling on to monotheist view, worldview, as the world was advancing into science, and they were completely living in their bubble. They refused to have to engage with technology whatsoever. At some point, they're just going to be completely, either they form their own kind of little bubble of reality, like, the Amish or whatever, and even they have been permeated with some technology, or or you're just experiencing this kind of radical death of who you used to be. It can actually be a real death. That is, you actually live your life as a pariah, completely excluded from society, self-excluded, until the point you die, or you make the shift and then part of you dies. And basically, if you're an Amish and you go outside of the community and start living in the world that we share, for instance, there's definitely a part of you that has to die, of your identity, because there's so many things that you have to let go, and that can be actually quite disturbing. So yeah, that's the whole idea, is to let yourself be transformed by the experiences of walking on stage, interacting with whoever you're interacting with, depending on what you wrote on your script. Like, I'm a climate activist. When you go up on stage, you meet people that give you that experience of being a climate activist. What do you learn from that? What kind of emotions do you feel? Do you need to change anything? Does it change anything to your worldview at that point, or about yourself? And I've experienced this for like 12 years doing this lobbying work as protecting the consumer. I have a completely different outlook on what that actually means after more than 10 years of doing this than when I started, obviously. But I know that some people in my circle have stuck to their guns. They're repeating the same thing 10 years later, word for word. And so you see that in that sense, they're stuck to a persona, an identity, and they refuse to evolve. And that can lead to sometimes really painful experiences. Now, how does it tie to retroactive thought or thoughts? Oops, there we go. Well, certain things in your identity are very personal to you, and you'd have to let die those things, but they're not related to anything that anybody else experienced. Like, for instance, if you heal a childhood trauma, for instance, of somebody calling you fat or whatever, you're not healing anybody else, you're not attached to anybody else's experience. But if, for instance, imagine you identify as somebody from the USSR, a citizen of the USSR, and then the USSR breaks down, the USSR is basically almost like an egregore, or a collective thought form. So it's something that people have thought up, millions and millions of people thinking the same thing, is like thought that coagulates and becomes something alive almost. One thing I like to say is that a thought cannot be any dumber than the thinker that thought it into existence. So if you think something, a thought comes out of your mind, that thought cannot be dumber than the one that thought it in the first place. It has its own kind of intelligence because it has been created by a being that is intelligent. And if you've watched my previous videos, basically you know that there's several dimensions here. For instance, humans are the bridge between the world of biology and the world of ideas or thoughts. And here you have the living cell as the portal between biology and chemistry. Here you have like animals, plants. And chemistry, you have basically planets. And here you have stars as the portal between chemistry and physics. So you have these portals or gateways or dimensions, whatever you want to call them. And here you just have like vaporous gases, atoms. And every time you have, unity, and then it's like, basically a star is a unity of atoms. and then this kind of splits into planets as it explodes into supernova, then unity as a cell, life, which then splits into so many different things, humans, animals, plants, which then becomes a conscious planet, almost like a planet that is bathing in the world of thought. I don't know. I really don't know how to call that, like a singularity kind of thing. Which uses all of this as its template or its source of inspiration for creating a world that is 100% abstract from our point of view, but 100% concrete from its point of view, obviously, because it's in its own reality. But let's not get sidetracked here. Retroactive thought. So millions of people think something, like the USSR, and then the USSR becomes a smart and intelligent, self-aware kind of entity that tries to influence back all of these people that thought it up in the first place, seeks to control them via plenty of different mechanisms, so they can keep thinking about it and feeding it with energy or thought energy. And here, the reason I put egregores here, because there are different types of thought forms. There are the there are two main ones that I want to distinguish. The first ones are source-connected ones, and the other ones are human-dependent. Let's call them like that. And this is really important to understand. Human-dependent egregores are basically thought forms that are unstable. Unstable in the sense that they are like biological chimeras, like a half horse, half human, or a kind of weird dragon or whatever. Those kind of biological forms take an immense amount of energy for them to maintain coherence, basically, to remain alive. It's like all of these layers basically exercise entropy. Entropy. Kind of force. So, for instance, if humans make a mess out of the planet, then entropy is a force that will break down whatever humans, like the mess that humans have done, break it down into biology, and if that doesn't work, break it down further into chemistry, and then rebuild from there. And all of the levels above here are a form of negative entropy or negentropy on the levels below. So it is what structures things, like humans or biology, or a force of negative entropy on chemistry, because it creates more order out of chemistry. Life is basically a negative entropy of chemistry, for chemistry. And if life is not stable, if you create a chimera, for instance, or a kind of weird biological thing, like for instance, like take cloning, like when humans started experimenting with cloning and with sheep, they realized that the clones that they created only had a few months of lifespan and developed all kinds of diseases. And so any kind of non-stable biological creation is going to suffer from the entropy of all the layers below it and will dissolve it into chemistry. So when you die as a human, you're basically everything that all of your body parts or whatever are decomposed into their chemical components. And so it's like this form of entropy on your body, because you no longer have the negative entropy force to maintain the integrity of your body. But the same applies to egregores, you see? So some egregores are just temporary, unstable. They're very difficult to maintain because they do not serve a real purpose. They're not part of a balanced ecosystem. They're not a stable, important, key kind of idea or thought that can feed off of itself because it's stable, it has its uses or whatever. And it's the same thing like with biology. You have all these, like in the early days, you had a lot of wild experimentations with biology because it didn't know what it could do. And then gradually it sort of settles in, and then you have all these ecosystems that come in and balance and whatever. But in the beginning, it was doing just like trial and error. And the same for humans. Like we think all of these egregores into existence, but some of them are dependent on humans to keep feeding them energy in order to survive because they cannot connect directly to, let's say, God source or whatever. Oops. God source. Source energy. It's like the energy of the void. But let me be more specific. So I guess you see now how it is linked to personal evolution. It is that you need to sever the links with these egregores in order for you to evolve further. Otherwise, you run the risk of just being a slave to those egregores which try to keep you within their kind of control, so you can feed them continuously energy. And that's all your nationalism, for instance, is one strategy. But I mean, even with climate activism, it's all about triggering your fear of climate change, that you're going to die and all those kind of things. And, just realize that anything you give your attention to as a human, you feed it energy. That is just how it is. And if you've watched my previous video, you understand that focused attention is the essential energy of this universe. That is, the energy at the start of the Big Bang is just basically God focusing his attention. I'm putting in as human, but just don't mind that. It's just like pure consciousness. It turned its attention on that one specific thing that was going on there. It's like, whoa, what is this? And just the mere fact of looking at that and putting all of its attention on it for a split second is enough to breathe an almost infinite amount of energy into something, and that is what we call the Big Bang. And then what we are doing as points of consciousness within our reality is just exchanging the initial focused attention that was used to create the Big Bang. So we're all imbued with this quality of a creator-observer, let's say, where anything you observe, you give your energy to, and you maintain its existence. Another way of saying this in the esoteric circles is whatever you resist persists, but that's it's more specific. It's saying that if you resist something, then it persists, but the fact that you're resisting it means you're giving attention to it, and whatever you're giving attention to it, you feed it, you make it grow. Now we obviously know this because when we turn our attention and put it into action, for instance, then obviously if you water your plants, then you're giving them that attention and they're going to grow. If you ignore them completely, they're going to die. Now we understand that at the level of action, physical action, the fact of physically paying attention to something and actually nurturing it, but we don't understand it in terms of our thoughts and our attention. But it works the same way. So just imagine that any egregore, like the egregore of the USSR, is like a plant, an ethereal plant. Ethereal? Say that? Etheric. That you're watering with your thoughts. And again, so some egregores are human dependent and some are source connected. And source connected are thought forms that have a specific or very important role in the future or the development of the universe, and therefore can directly connect to source once they're created. It's like this, like humans basically, when they have a thought, it creates something here in the world of ideas that becomes like almost like a self-aware idea that then experiments itself into the future, like all of the things that can grow out of it. Like, for instance, you invent the wheel as a concept, and then that thing then expands into everything that you can create with wheels, and and it's like all of the possibilities that spring from that idea come into existence now and like reverberate infinitely into all these potential parallel timelines and futures, because in the world of thought, it's nonlinear time. And so here you can experience things simultaneously. So you have like the car, the train, the plane, everything that uses basically the wheel as an idea. And the more a thought will enable transcendence, the more it will not be human dependent for its maintenance and its endured existence. So how can I picture this? Okay, so let's go back up a little bit, and living cell, all right? And here, the human as the bridge between biology and ideas, and here between biology and chemistry. So any chemical interaction between various components that gets it closer to manifesting life is something that is going to be fed energy from the future. And any chemical reactions that go sideways here and don't actually help the universe to manifest the next bridge are going to be needing to suck energy from things around it or below it or above it or whatever. So here, the same thing. Like, for instance, if biology then goes into a direction which is an evolutionary dead end, with monsters and huge like dinosaurs and things and whatever that eat each other, that are bigger and bigger with huge armor and stuff and whatever, then if that is an evolutionary cul-de-sac or dead end, then they will suffer from entropy, basically. Whereas anything that goes in the direction of manifesting the points of transcendence, or the forms that are bridges between two dimensions, that can be fed energy from the future, from the ultimate future where all is one, unity, which is God's source. Because it is going towards God's source as its destination, its ultimate destination. And so here, humans, now imagine that there is a singularity here, some point that I just cannot imagine what this would be. Maybe a conscious solar system, maybe. That is perhaps, it's just basically concepts and ideas as almost living entities which form a global coherent organism in and of themselves, that is bigger than the sum of their parts, and that becomes a new bridge or template for exploring further dimensions even higher. And that is, to me, it's beyond concept, it's beyond words. There are people that are talking about 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th dimension. And I don't even know how you can talk about that. Because to me, because they're beyond ideas, beyond concepts, it's things that don't really have a form, or that if it has a form to the human, it's really just, how should I say, it's more like a way of pleasing our minds than the real deal, because our brains will never be geared to understand what's, I mean, in my interpretation and view, what's above the fifth or sixth or seventh dimension. Just like if you had to explain to, I mean, imagine if you had to explain to an atom what a human being is. I mean, it's just so far remote. And even for a cell to grasp what a living human is a stretch, but it's still feasible because it's life and it's part of it. But then imagine explaining to a cell what a conscious planet looks like as humans being cells in this global collective organism. And at the level of the human, what you can explain to a cell is the different organs that function in harmony with the lungs, the stomach, all have this function of digesting and energy management and whatever and all that. But it will never be able to understand the world that is on the outside of the human experience. That is democracy, justice, what a computer is. I mean, it's just completely outside of experience. So because humans are the bridge between biology and ideas, we can still kind of think about ideas as being entities in and of themselves that might assemble in a certain manner. And we have such concepts as quantum computers and the singularity, which is like a being that can think at the speed of light and is so superior to humans and can think also in nonlinear ways, which I told you, like this dimension is nonlinear, obviously, with the multi-threading example for computers where it can run parallel threads. These are all just metaphors for understanding the world of ideas or thought, which is structured by humans, or rather 8 or 9 billion humans forming a collective global organism where each human is kind of like a neuron in a giant brain. And of course, like for instance, a single neuron in your brain will never be able to grasp the concept of democracy, but your neurons arranged in a certain pattern or way in your brain will allow you, your conscious self, to be able to understand a concept like democracy. And by the same token, the being that we are a part of, there are certain concepts that can be comprehensible or accessible to it through a neural network of several humans, but those concepts or those ideas or whatever will be forever inaccessible to a single human. Now, we can try to translate that into human words or whatever, but it'll always be just a tiny little fragment of the real deal. And to get back on topic again, it's the same thing. Like, for instance, if you have the USSR here, which is just a tiny little blip in human history, it is a thought that fizzles out and doesn't really play such a key role in the whole evolution or the grander scheme of things of the evolution of the universe and going back towards unity, God, or source. And so it has to feed on human energy or thoughts to feed itself, whereas ideas more universal, like even just the idea of God, for instance, doesn't necessarily require humans to feed it, except if it's egregores type God, if it's like a sub-part of God that is a limited view of what God actually is, that is a limited creation of the human mind, a thought form that will need to be fed by human thought and that will try to manipulate humans into feeding it via prayer, via all kinds of things. But God as a concept, as the real deal, does not need human energy because it can directly tap into source, because as a concept, it's just so pure that it doesn't require any of our energy or attention. Once it's been created, it'll sit there forever. because it's a key concept or building block in the world of ideas. And there may be plenty of other ideas, like non-duality, maybe, I guess, very important concept, and all kinds of other things like justice, I guess, as a pure concept, not what people may think of what justice is, but just the concept justice without any attributes or consciousness or all kinds of other things. And these can feed directly from source because they are a key component in going towards this new transcendence that is getting us closer and closer to God, source, to unity, back to unity. So, I don't know if all of this was clear, but I guess you understand here that in the world of thought, every single possible use case of God, the moment the concept is thought about, has its own kind of life. And if it manages to spread into the future, and that one timeline of that concept manages to hit or is a key part of that point of transcendence, then that thought will not require so much human energy to be kept alive. But if there is no timeline where this concept actually manages to further the experience of the universe in going back to unity, then it'll be cut off from source and will require human energy. And then obviously, once you create these thoughts and they can feed off of God's source, then when I said retroactive thoughts, it's because these thoughts then influence humans in turn for their evolution, and they create even better versions or ideas and manage to reinforce, for instance, these timelines or these connections to source, because they manage to, how should I say, give more energy to some of these thoughts. And so it's this retroactive process, where retroactive in a negative sense, when you have these temporary egregores where they try to manipulate humans into feeding that whatever idea it is. And of course that also may materialize. Like, for instance, the USSR was actually, it was an idea that took form in matter via institutions, via all kinds of humans, making it real, making the system real, making the experience real. And so that influences people in turn, and then people think new things about the egregore because they live a new experience within the updated version of the USSR, and that makes that egregore grow. And so it's like a circular process of, humans have a thought, that thought takes root, grows, and they get feedback from whatever that thought experienced in a multidimensional way, and then they feed it again based on that experience that they've materialized now, and that grows some more and some more and some more until this feedback loop sort of becomes non-symbiotic, in the way that you're feeding this egregore but it's leading nowhere. And so you're like, okay, well, you feel like it's actually absorbing your energy more than it's feeding you. It's like, it's not this kind of experience that you would have with egregores or ideas that are connected to source, because they will give you energy. It will feel like you're full of energy because they can tap into the unity, God source kind of energy, and so they feed you. So you live an experience here on earth based on those ideas, which makes you think of new ways of updating those and feeding those egregores. They grow more, they access more energy from God source, they feed you more, and so on. It's like a virtuous cycle, an ascending spiral, where here it's like a descending spiral, doom spiral, where you're being sucked more and more energy for very little quote-unquote gain. So that's the retroactive in the video. That's what I'm referring to by retroactive. It's that there is a feedback loop between these things. And the same happens here. Like basically everything here is tied up. It's not like you can separate any of these things. So for instance, imagine that some biological creatures have experiences here in the world of biology, and those experiences influence the chemical compounds down here to interact in a certain way to manifest life. Everything is retroactive, everything is linked to everything else, and it's the same exact process. So everything creates everything, everything is tied. And I have many other videos about multidimensionality and how this works and expands and evolves simultaneously in all directions into the future, where this expands, this expands, this expands as well. Our story of evolution is becoming bigger and bigger. For instance, we went from this being just a little tiny blip of a few thousand years in the Bible, where God created, the animals, the plants, the water, whatever, and a few thousand years old Earth, and then it expands as the whole universe grows in consciousness and awareness into a billion-year story where you have gradual evolution. So what I mean also is that because any thought that you have, basically, then you can try to be consciously aware of the feedback that you can receive from the thought that you had and see where it leads you. Which is why sometimes you have a thought about doing something or being someone or wanting to do something, and if you tap into that thought again, you can actually receive feedback from the future, quote unquote, where that thought experienced itself and all of the potential, timelines that spring from that thought. Like, for instance, I want to be a professional soccer player. And then you, in your present moment, can then tap into all of these timelines and see, okay, is it beneficial or not globally? Should I actually engage in that, or should I do another thought and say I want to be a concert pianist? And that thought also springs in all kinds of timelines. And that's why I think like children basically do this instinctively, where they think about doing something or being someone, and they can tap directly into the feeling of those multiple timelines, and whether they are, how should I say, whether they further their growth, whether they are pleasant, whether they're joyful, whether they are positive for their development, and steer in that direction and go that way rather than go another way. Like they're still kind of in tune with that kind of sync between their thoughts, the fact that the thoughts create or become alive and basically test all kinds of different timelines for them, and then they can receive the feedback of that and decide, I want to go there because I can see that one of those timelines, for instance, is really beautiful, and I want to try and tap into that one. So I encourage you to try that. Like, you have a thought, and then the next day, maybe like you wait 24 hours and you have that thought again, and you ask to receive like an emotion or something of what that thought managed to explore for you in terms of the timelines, the possibilities, and everything. And obviously right now, and that's why like many spiritual leaders are saying that we should learn to control our thoughts, is because for the moment we're like somebody that's drowning in a pool and it's splashing all over the place, and then there's like, you're in a water basin and you're splashing all over the place, and there's this waves. It's so chaotic. There's just so many waves and everything just going all over the place, and you can't make sense of any of it because it's just such utter chaos. And that's what we do as humans, and even me. I mean, obviously, We have like, I don't know how many, 20 or 30 or 40,000 thoughts a day. Every single second we have a thought. And that thought actually creates something. Now, I'm not saying that these thoughts live forever, obviously. They have a very limited life, just like, a seed that you plant in biology. If you don't, you don't feed it like sunlight or water and all that stuff, you don't nurture it, it might just like sprout and then die. And it's the same for our thoughts. They're like little seeds that go into the world of ideas and then sprout there. And if nobody feeds them, they'll just wither and die. But you can still get like a feedback from the sprout and see if it was going somewhere, if it was promising or not, and let it grow and grow and grow and grow. And as it grows, you can sort of learn whether you like it or not. And at some point you can let it die. But the bigger it is, don't forget that the bigger it becomes, the more it will want your energy. And it will try to manipulate you, just like any kind of being. Just like we feed off of plenty of things, so too do these thought forms feed off of us. And so the idea is, when you're in this pool of water now, then instead of splashing around, and this I owe to one of the clairvoyants that I'm following that I really respect, you just give a tiny little impulse into the water, and it just goes off like ripples, reverberates against the surface, comes back to you, and you get this feedback. And that's exactly the kind of feedback process that I'm talking about. You having a thought, it sprouts in the world of ideas, you ask to receive the feedback loop to see if it was something pleasant, good, or if it's going in the good direction, if it feels like something you want to nurture. And if yes, then you continue and you shower it with your energy, your intentions again, and it grows a little further, and you repeat that process. But right now, as I said, we're like more splashing around like crazy, going like just issuing thoughts in all kinds of directions. In the future, in like 100 years or so, humans will be able to have like this one very, very clear thought at a certain point in time, and that thought will be so powerful it may create something instantly, even maybe in matter. Because right now this feedback loop is very, very long. Like, you first have to have many different thoughts before you actually act on those thoughts, and before those thoughts take material form. Like, it took how many decades for Marx's work in communism to actually manifest as a revolution and then as a USSR. Today, we're in an accelerated timeline or period where thoughts, this reverberation and feedback loop becomes bigger and bigger. I mean, bigger and bigger, faster and faster, simply because the frequency is rising. And you will know that, for instance, if you're in the mountains and you scream and you have this echo that comes back to you, it only comes back after a second or so, because sound travels at 330 meters per second. But that's because of the frequency of your voice. Now, if you could shout in the gigahertz range, then the echo would be instantaneous virtually. And so that's the whole idea of this whole thing about people saying in the esoteric circle spirituality that we are going into a higher frequency or whatever, or that where the earth is raising its frequency. It just means quicker manifestation, which means also a necessity for consciousness to grow, because your thoughts are more and more powerful, more and more potent, will sprout more and more easily and show will manifest, let's say, in physicality quicker and quicker, which means you have to learn to control them, or else you'll drown in your own thoughts, in a hell that you've constructed for yourself via all of your thoughts. And you're a prisoner of your own self-inflicted, thought-created reality. So you're a prisoner of your egregores that you've created that suck your mental energy. Plus, these egregores then influence your material reality to give you experiences to reinforce them and think about them even more. And that locks you in your own kind of physical material hell made up of your manifested thought forms. Obviously, this is the negative side of things, but it also means that on the positive side of things, a positive feedback loop will get you to paradise in no time also. So I hope you found this interesting. If you have any comments, don't hesitate to leave a comment, and talk to you in the next video.